The rain began to fall, not with the gentle grace of a cleansing shower, but with the cold, stinging insistence of a city that had long forgotten how to be kind. Each drop that struck Alara's cheek felt like a tiny, frozen judgment. She pulled the thin blanket tighter around the wicker bassinet, a futile gesture against the encroaching chill that had less to do with the weather and more to do with the hollow space carved out in her chest. The streetlights of the upper city bled into halos of indifferent gold, reflecting off the polished obsidian facade of the building before her. It was less a building and more a monument to power, a sheer cliff of glass and steel that dared the sky to challenge it. Inside the bassinet, Thea stirred, a small, questioning sound that tore through the fragile composure Ilara had spent the last 3 days constructing. She looked down at her daughter's face, so perfect, so serene in sleep, a miniature echo of a man Ilara had not seen in 5 years. A man who had no idea this tiny, perfect life even existed. Her breath hitched, a ragged, painful sound in the cavernous silence of the empty street. This was not a choice. It was the end of choices. It was the last remaining move on a board where she had already been checkmated. She thought about the eviction notice, the stark, brutal red letters on the door of the apartment she could no longer afford. She thought about the last of her money, folded into a pathetic square in her pocket, not enough for another week, let alone a life. She thought about Marcus, his face a mask of performative charm that had cracked one too many times, revealing the ugly, possessive rage beneath. The memory of his hand closing around her arm, his voice a low snarl of ownership, "You're not going anywhere," was a fresh bruise on her soul. He was not looking for her yet, but he would be. He was a man who considered her an asset, a piece of his collection, and he would not tolerate a blank space on his shelf. He had not updated the file. He was working from a version of her that had never been accurate, a version that he believed he could break and then reassemble to his liking. Her fingers, numb with cold and fear, fumbled with the note she had rewritten 100 times. The paper was soft and worn from her anxious folding and unfolding. The words were simple, stark, stripped of the years of pain and longing that lay beneath them. Her name is Thea. She is 10 weeks old. She is yours. Her blood type is O negative, and she is allergic to the standard whey protein in most formulas. I am so sorry. Please, keep her safe. She had not signed it. A name felt like an anchor, and she needed to be adrift. She needed to be invisible. With a final, trembling breath that tasted of rain and regret, she tucked the envelope into the folds of Thea's blanket, just beside her tiny, curled fist. She knelt, her knees protesting against the cold, wet pavement, and pressed her lips to her daughter's forehead. The scent of her, that unique, intoxicating baby scent of milk and innocence, filled her senses. It was the smell of home, of love, of everything she was about to surrender. A single tear, hot and traitorous, escaped and landed on Thea's cheek. Ilara wiped it away with the pat of her thumb. A last, lingering touch. She did not scream. She did not sob. The grief was too vast for sound. It was the kind of silence that doesn't echo, the kind that settles, heavy and suffocating, a weight in the lungs. Straightening up, she took one last look at the imposing gilded entrance. The revolving doors were still, the lobby beyond a cavern of warm light and silent security. This was Adrian's world, a world she had brushed against once, a lifetime ago, before it had become this untouchable fortress. She remembered him not as the titan of industry his name now represented, but as a young man with quiet eyes that saw too much and a rare smile that felt like a secret shared only with her. That man was gone, likely replaced by a version forged in boardrooms and hostile takeovers. But he had been kind once. He had been honorable. That memory was the single, flickering candle she was trusting to light this desperate, dark path. She turned away. She did not look back. Each step was a physical tearing, a severing of the most fundamental bond a human can know. The city swallowed her into its shadows, a ghost leaving behind the only part of her that was truly alive. The rain fell harder, washing the pavement clean, as if she had never been there at all. Adrian Thorne did not enjoy routine, but he respected its efficiency. At precisely 2 in the morning, his internal clock would wake him, and he would descend from his penthouse to the private gymnasium on the 10th floor. It was a ritual of control, a way to tame the restless energy that powered his empire. Tonight was no different. He moved through the silent, art-filled corridors of his home, his footsteps making no sound on the polished marble. The city sprawled beneath his windows, a glittering circuit board that he knew how to operate better than any man alive. The elevator doors opened directly into the main lobby, a feature he'd had installed for security, bypassing all other floors. He was halfway across the cavernous space when a sound, small and utterly alien, snagged his attention. It was a soft, mewling cry, almost lost in the vastness of the hall. He stopped. His head tilted, a predator sensing a disruption in its territory. His security chief, a silent man named Corbin who materialized from the shadows near the security desk, was already moving toward the main entrance. Adrian held up a hand. A quiet, simple gesture that halted the trained killer in his tracks. "I'll handle it," Adrian said, his voice a low murmur that seemed to absorb the light in the room. He was not a man given to curiosity, but this was not curiosity. This was an anomaly. And Adrian Thorne dealt with anomalies personally. He approached the massive revolving doors, his eyes scanning, processing. He saw it then. Tucked just to the side, sheltered from the worst of the rain by the deep granite overhang, was a wicker bassinet. It was a thing of impossible softness and domesticity against the hard, brutalist lines of his building. He did not rush. He was not performing. His movements were deliberate, economical, as he pushed through one of the side doors and stepped out into the damp night air. The crying had stopped. He stood over the basket, the rain misting his face, and looked down. A baby, a tiny human, swaddled in a pink blanket, its face scrunched in the aftermath of a cry. For a full 10 seconds, the world seemed to tilt on its axis. The ceaseless calculations in his mind, the stock tickers and acquisition strategies and risk assessments, all went silent. It was a silence he had not experienced since childhood. Then his eyes caught the white of the envelope. He reached down, his long, immaculate fingers plucking it from the blanket. The paper was damp, slightly warped. He opened it. The handwriting was elegant, familiar, a ghost from a past he had carefully archived and stored away. "Ilara, her name is Thea. She is 10 weeks old. She is yours." The words did not register as a shock. They landed with the cold, hard finality of a dropped stone in a deep well. He read the rest of the note, the blood type, the allergy, the unsigned apology. He looked from the note to the baby's face, truly seeing her for the first time, the shape of her mouth, the slight arch of her brow. He saw the echo of his own mother, and beneath that, the ghost of his own reflection. There was no doubt. It was a mathematical certainty, a feeling he could not name. Something vast and protective and utterly terrifying rose in his chest. It was not anger. It was a cold, clarifying rage, but it was not directed at Ilara. It was directed at a world that could corner someone like her so completely that this became her only option. He looked up at the city, at the thousands of blinking lights and darkened windows. Somewhere out there, she was alone, terrified and running. A switch flipped in his mind. The brief human moment of shock was over. The sovereign took over. He carefully picked up the bassinet, shielding it with his own body as he carried it back inside. Corbin was waiting, his face a mask of professional neutrality, though his eyes were wide with questions he would never ask. "Get Dr. Allister here. Now," Adrian commanded, his voice steady as iron wrapped in silk. "And get me a pediatric specialist, the best one in the country. I don't care what time it is. Get them on a plane." He walked past Corbin, carrying the basket as if it were made of spun glass. "Sir?" Corbin asked, his voice hesitant. Adrian paused, but did not turn. "Get me my mother." "At this hour, Mr. Thorne?" "Yes." He continued toward the private elevator. As the doors slid shut, he looked down at the sleeping child. Thea. Her name was Thea. He reached into his pocket and pulled out his personal phone, a device only a handful of people had the number for. He scrolled to a single contact. "Hale." "Sir." A crisp voice answered instantly. "I need a ghost found," Adrian said, his eyes fixed on the baby. "Her name is Alara Vance. 5'7", brown hair, green eyes. Last known address was likely low-income housing in the industrial district. She's smart, she's resourceful, and she's running scared. I want every traffic camera, every ATM withdrawal, every facial recognition scan from the last 72 hours in a 500-mile radius. I want a complete digital and physical lockdown on all transit hubs. No bus, no train, no flight leaves this city without us knowing who is on it. I want her found. I want her safe. And I want it done in the next hour." There was a beat of silence on the other end, then, "Consider it done, sir." Adrian hung up. He looked from the baby to the sprawling city outside his window. He was not shutting it down to punish it. He was shutting it down to sift it, to run it through his fingers like sand until he found the one precious thing he was looking for. The hunt had begun. Alara sat on the edge of a lumpy mattress in a room that smelled of stale cigarettes and despair. The motel was a last resort, a cash-only establishment on the forgotten edge of the city, where the neon signs flickered like dying heartbeats. The $112 in her pocket had shrunk to $60. Enough for one more night, maybe two. And then, nothing. The void. She had not slept. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Thea's face. She felt the phantom weight of her in her arms. The ache in her chest was a physical presence, a jagged hole that breathed with a rhythm of its own. She had done the right thing. She repeated the words to herself, a mantra that had lost all meaning. It was the only way to keep Thea safe. Safe from Marcus's rage, safe from the poverty that was closing in like a fist. Adrian had resources. He could give Thea a life, a future, everything Alara could not. It was a logical, brutal calculation, but logic was a poor comfort for a mother's heart. A knock on the door made her jump, her heart slamming against her ribs. It couldn't be. Not yet. Marcus wouldn't have found her this fast. She held her breath, trying to become part of the shabby room's shadows. "Ilara." The voice was not Marcus's. It was low, calm, and it cut through the door and the years, and plugged directly into a part of her memory she thought was long dead. Adrian. Panic, cold and sharp, seized her. How had he found her? She scrambled backward on the bed, her eyes wide, fixed on the flimsy wooden door as if it could hold back the tide. "Ilara, I'm not going to hurt you," the voice continued, impossibly steady. "The door is unlocked. I'm coming in. I am alone." He did not wait for permission. The doorknob turned, and the door swung inward. He stood there, silhouetted against the sickly yellow light of the motel walkway. He was different, yet exactly the same. The 5 years had sharpened him, carving away the last of his youthful softness and leaving behind something more formidable, more absolute. He wore a dark suit that probably cost more than the entire motel, yet he did not look out of place. He simply made the place look wrong. He stepped inside, closing the door behind him with a quiet click. His eyes found her, and the intensity in them pinned her to the spot. There was no anger, no accusation. There was something else, something deeper and more unsettling. A quiet, possessive focus. "How did you find me?" she whispered, her voice hoarse. "It doesn't matter," he said, taking another step into the room. "She's safe. She's at the penthouse. My mother is with her." The mention of his mother, a woman Alara remembered as fierce and kind in equal measure, sent a wave of dizzying relief through her. She sagged against the headboard, the tension draining out of her so quickly she felt faint. "She's okay?" "She's perfect," he said, his voice softening almost imperceptibly. She has your eyes. He paused, his gaze sweeping over the grim little room, taking in the peeling wallpaper, the stained carpet, her own disheveled state. A muscle tightened in his jaw. This ends now. You're coming with me. It was not a request. It was a statement of fact. A part of her, the part that had been fighting for so long, bristled at the command. I can't, she said, shaking her head. You don't understand. There's someone. Marcus Gallo, Adrian supplied, his voice turning flat and cold. Real estate developer, minor holdings in commercial properties, a portfolio built on leverage and intimidation, a reputation for being unpleasant, especially to women. I know who he is. Ilara stared at him, stunned into silence. He had learned all of that in the space of a few hours? He won't be a problem anymore, Adrian stated simply. That is not something you need to concern yourself with ever again. The finality in his tone was absolute. It was the sound of a god declaring a mortal's fate, the kind of power that didn't need to shout, the kind that simply was. You can't just, she started, the protest dying on her lips. What was she going to say? That he couldn't just erase a man like Marcus? Looking at him, at the quiet, unshakable certainty in his eyes, she knew that was exactly what he could do. He took another step, his presence filling the tiny room, shrinking it to nothing. You left our daughter on my doorstep, Ilara. Did you think I would just hire a nanny and update my will? Did you think I would let her mother disappear into this? He gestured vaguely at the room, his distaste clear. I didn't have a choice! The words burst out of her raw and painful. He was going to find me. I had nothing left. I did it to protect her. I know, he said, his voice dropping again, becoming softer. Which is why you are going to let me protect both of you now. He closed the remaining distance between them, stopping just before the bed. He did not reach for her. He simply stood there, a bastion of stillness in her chaotic world. Come home, Ilara. Thea needs her mother. Home. The word resonated in the empty spaces inside her. He wasn't offering a sanctuary or a hiding place. He was offering a home. Tears she hadn't allowed herself to shed at his doorstep now streamed freely down her face. They were not tears of grief, but of a terrifying, disorienting relief. The fight was over. Someone else was holding the line. She gave a single shaky nod. He did not smile, but the rigid lines of his face seemed to soften. All right, he said quietly. He held out a hand. Let's go. She looked at his hand, strong and steady, and after a moment's hesitation, she placed her own in it. His fingers closed around hers, warm and firm. It was not a passionate gesture. It was a promise, an anchor. He pulled her gently to her feet, and without a backward glance at the miserable room, he led her out of the darkness and into the first, fragile light of dawn. The transition was jarring, a violent collision of two realities. One moment, Ilara was in a grimy motel at the edge of the world. The next, she was ascending in a silent chrome elevator that opened directly into a living space the size of a cathedral. The penthouse was a world of cool grays, gleaming surfaces, and floor-to-ceiling windows that displayed the city like a conquered territory. It was breathtaking and terrifyingly sterile. It was Adrian's world, distilled. A woman with silver hair and Adrian's intense eyes rose from a plush white sofa. Helena Thorne. She looked at Ilara, her gaze sweeping over her with a sharp, assessing quality that missed nothing. Then her eyes softened, and she smiled a genuine, warm smile. You must be exhausted, my dear, Helena said, her voice rich with a warmth that was entirely absent from her son's. She crossed the room and took Ilara's free hand, her touch surprisingly firm. I'm Helena, and I've been keeping this little one company. She led Ilara toward a state-of-the-art bassinet that stood in the center of the vast room like a piece of modern sculpture. Peeking over the edge, Ilara saw Thea, awake and placid, her wide, dark eyes staring up at a mobile of gently rotating stars. A sob of pure, unadulterated relief caught in Alara's throat. She reached in and lifted her daughter, holding her tight against her chest, burying her face in the soft curve of her neck. Thea smelled clean and sweet, of expensive baby lotion in the quiet safety of this impossible place. "I took the liberty of having a few things brought up," Helena said, gesturing around the room. What Alara had failed to notice before, she saw now. An entire corner of the penthouse had been transformed into a high-end nursery. A crib, a changing table, stacks of diapers, rows of formula, the specific whey-free kind she'd mentioned in the note. A wave of dizziness washed over her at the sheer speed and efficiency of it all. Adrian hadn't just accepted responsibility, he had absorbed it into his world, seamlessly and completely. "Thank you," Alara murmured, her voice thick with emotion. "Nonsense," Helena waved a dismissive hand. "She's my granddaughter. It's the least I could do." She looked from Alara to her son, who stood silently by the window observing them. A complex, knowing look passed between them. "Now, I believe you two have things to discuss. Alara, a suite has been prepared for you. Rest, eat, be with your daughter. No one will bother you." With that, she gave Alara's arm a final reassuring squeeze and swept out of the room, a whirlwind of matriarchal authority. Silence descended, broken only by Thea's soft gurgling. Alara turned to face Adrian, clutching Thea like a shield. "This is a lot," she said, the understatement of the century. "It is what is necessary," he replied, his gaze fixed on the baby in her arms. A flicker of something unreadable crossed his face. "There is a trust being established for her, a legal framework for her protection and inheritance. My lawyers are drafting it now." The cold corporate language was jarring. "She's a baby, Adrian, not a merger." "She is my daughter," he said, the words holding an immense weight. "She will have everything. She will be protected by the full extent of my resources. That includes legal and financial fortification. It is the most important merger I will ever oversee." He was not being unfeeling. She realized he was speaking the only language he truly knew, the language of power, of structure, of absolute control. It was how he showed he cared. Over the next few days, Alara existed in a state of suspended disbelief. The suite Helena had mentioned was larger than her entire old apartment, with a bedroom, a sitting area, and a marble bathroom that felt sinfully luxurious. Clothes appeared in the closet, in her size. A private chef prepared meals tailored to her preferences, which someone had somehow discovered. It was like living inside a fortress run by benevolent, mind-reading ghosts. But beneath the relief was a current of unease. She was a guest, a ward. Her life had been taken out of her hands. She pushed back in small ways. She insisted on preparing Thea's bottles herself. She declined the services of the on-call nanny who appeared one afternoon. She started sketching again, filling a notepad she'd found with designs for buildings, a talent she had been forced to abandon when she met Marcus, who had belittled her ambition as a cute hobby. Adrian was a quiet, constant presence. He worked from his office down the hall, the door always slightly ajar. They fell into a strange, domestic rhythm. He would emerge for meals, which they ate together in silence that was not awkward, but full. In the evenings, he would stand by the window, holding Thea, showing her the city lights. He was surprisingly natural with the baby, his large, capable hands gentle and sure. One evening, she found him in the nursery, staring down at Thea in her crib. "I never knew," he said without looking up. "You should have told me, Alara." "I was going to," she said softly, coming to stand beside him. "I found out I was pregnant right after we ended things. I tried to call. Your number was disconnected. You had already moved on, started building all of this. I was just a girl from your past. It didn't feel right to disrupt your life." "You wouldn't have been a disruption," he said, his voice low. "You would have been a priority." He finally turned to look at her, his eyes searching hers. "I don't leave because things become complicated, Alara. I was young and my father had just died. I was trying to hold his company together. I was a fool to let you go. It was the single worst business decision I've ever made." She couldn't help a small, watery smile. Still with the business metaphors. "It's how I'm wired," he admitted, "but the sentiment is not transactional." During these quiet days, she would occasionally see him on the phone, his back to her, his voice a low, lethal hum. She would catch snippets. "Liquidate his assets. Call in the markers. The zoning board will not approve his permits. I want his credit lines frozen by morning." She knew, without having to ask, that he was systematically dismantling Marcus Gallo. He was not just putting out a fire, he was salting the earth where it had burned. It was terrifying, and to a part of her she was ashamed of, deeply, cathartically satisfying. He was not doing it with rage or violence, but with the quiet, crushing weight of his influence. It was the contrast between Marcus's hollow, performed power and Adrian's deep, quiet, structural power. One afternoon, Hale, Adrian's ever-present assistant, appeared with a tablet. "Mr. Thorne thought you might want to see this, Miss Vance." On the screen was a news article. Gallo Development's files for Chapter 11 bankruptcy. A photo showed Marcus outside a courthouse, his face pale and drawn, his usual swagger completely gone. He looked small, defeated. Ilara felt a cold knot of dread. "He's going to be desperate," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "A desperate man is dangerous." Adrian spoke from the doorway. He must have been listening. "He is," he agreed, stepping into the room. "And his desperation is the final piece of the equation." He took the tablet from Hale. "Thank you, Hale. That will be all." He looked at Ilara, his expression calm and unyielding. "He's going to make a mistake. A public one. And when he does, we will be ready." Marcus Gallo paced his now empty office like a caged animal. The designer furniture had been repossessed. The phones were cut off. His employees, the ones who had laughed at his jokes and fetched his coffee, were gone. They had scattered like rats from a sinking ship the moment the money dried up. It had happened so fast. One day, he was a king in his small kingdom. The next, his lines of credit vanished, his lenders called in loans he couldn't pay, and a series of catastrophic building code violations were suddenly discovered on his flagship project, halting all work indefinitely. It wasn't bad luck. It was a coordinated, systematic execution, and he knew, with a certainty that chilled him to the bone, that it all led back to Ilara. She had run to someone powerful. The thought filled him with a potent cocktail of fury and disbelief. Ilara, his quiet, compliant Ilara, had a hidden ace up her sleeve. It was infuriating. It was insulting. Give her 3 days, he had boasted to his lawyer before the man had dropped him as a client. She'll be begging to come back. She has nothing, no one. He had been wrong. He had underestimated her, and that galled him more than the financial ruin. He had hired a private investigator with the last of his accessible cash, a slimy man who had tracked Ilara to a low-life motel and then, impossibly, to the Thorne Tower. Adrian Thorne. The name had hit Marcus like a physical blow. He had seen the man's face in magazines, a modern-day Midas whose wealth was obscene, mythical. His first move had been one of pure, arrogant stupidity. He had driven to the Thorne Tower and tried to demand entry. The security guards in the lobby, men who looked like they were carved from granite, hadn't even bothered to look amused. They had simply blocked his path, their silence more intimidating than any threat. He had screamed Ilara's name, demanded to see his property, an outburst that only earned him the cool, contemptuous stare of the head of security. He was escorted from the premises like a common drunk. The humiliation burned. Now, sitting in the dark, he scrolled through society blogs on his phone. His last remaining connection to the world he was being so brutally ejected from. And then he saw it. An announcement for the annual Obsidian Gala, the most exclusive charity event of the year, hosted by Thorne Industries, and listed on the host committee, Adrian Thorne. A desperate, ugly plan began to form in his mind. He couldn't get to her behind Thorne's walls, but at a public event, even a high-security one, there were opportunities. There were cameras. There was an audience. He would confront her. He would expose her. He would tell the world that she was a lying, cheating gold digger who had abandoned him. He would create a scene so public, so vile, that even a man like Thorne would be forced to cut her loose to avoid the scandal. He still had one good suit. He still had the face and the swagger that had gotten him into 100 exclusive parties before. He didn't understand the game he was playing. He thought it was about social standing and public perception. He thought he was creating a problem for Adrian Thorne. He did not realize he was no longer a player in the game. He was merely the ball, and he was being guided directly toward the pocket. His fatal miscalculation was believing he still had a move left to make. He was working from a version of the world that was no longer accurate. The map had been redrawn without his knowledge, and he was about to walk confidently off the edge of it. The night of the Obsidian Gala arrived wrapped in an atmosphere of electric anticipation. The air in the penthouse was calm, but it was the charged stillness before a storm. Elara stood before a full-length mirror, staring at a reflection she didn't recognize. She wore an emerald gown, the color of her eyes, a column of silk that was both elegant and architectural. It was a dress that spoke of confidence and strength, two things she was struggling to feel. Her hair was styled in a sleek, intricate knot at the base of her neck, and a string of delicate diamonds, a loan from Helena, glittered at her throat. "You look beautiful," a voice said from the doorway. Adrian stood there, dressed in a charcoal suit so perfectly tailored it seemed an extension of his own formidable presence. He was not looking at the dress or the diamonds. He was looking at her, his eyes holding an expression of quiet approval that did more for her confidence than any compliment. "I feel like I'm in costume," she admitted, her hands smoothing down the silk. "It's not a costume," he said, stepping into the room. "It's armor, and tonight you may need it." His gaze was steady. "You don't have to do this. We can stay here." "No," she said, meeting his eyes in the mirror. Her voice was surprisingly firm. "I'm tired of hiding. I'm not the one who did anything wrong." It was the first time she had truly believed it. He gave a slight, affirming nod. "All right." He held out his arm. "Shall we?" The gala was a sensory overload. A sea of black ties and designer gowns swirled under the light of massive crystal chandeliers in the grand ballroom of the city's oldest museum. Conversations hummed, a low buzz of power and influence. For the first hour, Elara felt a paralyzing self-consciousness. She stayed close to Adrian's side, his presence a silent shield against the curious stares. He introduced her to a few people, CEOs, senators, artists, not as a guest or a +1, but with a simple, "This is Elara Vance." The name was delivered with a weight that discouraged further questions. They were standing near the terrace doors, Adrian in a quiet conversation with a white-haired banking magnate, when Elara felt it. A cold prickle of dread on the back of her neck. She turned, her eyes scanning the crowd, and then she saw him. Marcus was standing near the grand staircase, looking wildly out of place. His suit was a size too tight, his face was slick with sweat, and his eyes had a feverish, desperate glint. He saw her, and a predatory smile spread across his lips. He started moving toward them, shouldering his way through the crowd with a graceless urgency. "Adrian," she said, her voice low and tight. Her hand instinctively went to his arm. Adrian did not need to look. He had been tracking Marcus's position since they arrived. "It's all right," he said, his voice a calm murmur in her ear. He turned from his conversation, placing himself slightly in front of her. "Stay behind me." "Elara!" Marcus's voice was too loud, too sharp, slicing through the polite hum of the room. A few conversations faltered. Heads began to turn. "There you are. I've been looking all over for you." He came to a stop before them, his chest puffed out in a pathetic display of dominance. He ignored Adrian completely, his eyes locked on Elara. "What is this? What are you wearing? Did you really think you could just run off and play princess in some rich guy's castle?" "Marcus, you need to leave," Elara said, her voice trembling slightly but holding its ground. "Leave? I'm not going anywhere," he sneered. "You have an obligation to me. We have things to sort out." He reached out and grabbed her arm, his fingers digging into her skin. "We're leaving." "Let go of my arm," she said, her voice cold and clear. Before Marcus could react, Adrian's hand closed around his wrist. It was not a violent movement. It was precise, deliberate, and final. Marcus's eyes widened, first in surprise, then in pain, as Adrian's grip tightened with measured, inhuman pressure. "Take your hand off her," Adrian said. His voice was not raised. It was a low, chillingly pleasant rumble, but it carried across the sudden, heavy silence that had fallen over their corner of the ballroom. Marcus tried to pull away, but it was like being caught in a vice. "This is none of your business, Thorne. This is a private matter between me and my girlfriend." "She is not your girlfriend," Adrian stated. He looked down at the hand on Marcus's wrist as if it were a piece of filth. "And you are touching my property." The words were archaic, possessive, but in that moment, Alara understood. He was speaking Marcus's language, the language of ownership. With a slight, almost casual twist of his wrist, Adrian forced Marcus to release Alara's arm. He then shoved him back a step, a movement of pure, contemptuous dismissal. Two of Adrian's security men, indistinguishable from the other guests in their tuxedos, materialized at his side. Marcus stumbled, his face a mask of fury and humiliation. The audience was growing. "You think you can buy her? You think you can buy everyone?" He spat, his voice cracking. "She's nothing. She came to you with nothing. She brought you a bastard child, and you took her in." The ugly words hung in the air. A collective gasp went through the onlookers. Alara felt the blood drain from her face. Adrian, however, remained perfectly calm. He even smiled, a thin, cold curve of his lips that held no warmth at all. "You're right," he said, his voice dangerously soft. "I do buy things, Marcus. It's what I'm good at." He took a small step forward, invading Marcus's space, forcing him to shrink back. "Let me tell you what I've bought recently. 3 weeks ago, I acquired a controlling interest in the holding company that owns the debt on your flagship development project. 2 weeks ago, I purchased the entirety of your outstanding personal and business credit lines from 3 different financial institutions. Last week, the shell corporation that owns the building your penthouse is in, that became one of my assets. I own your debt. I own your home. I own the land on which your failed ambitions are built." He paused, letting the words sink in, each one a nail in Marcus's coffin. He pulled out his phone, the screen glowing in the dim light. "This is a confirmation of a wire transfer. 5 minutes ago, I also purchased the last thing you thought you had left. Gallo Developments. The name, the brand, all remaining assets. All for the bargain price of $1. It's done." Marcus stared at him, his mouth hanging open, his face turning a sickly ashen color. The swagger, the arrogance, the rage. It all evaporated, leaving behind a hollow, terrified man. You can't," he stammered, shaking his head in disbelief. "Why?" "Because you put your hands on what is mine," Adrian said, his voice dropping to a whisper that was more terrifying than any shout. He leaned in closer. "And because my daughter, the one you just insulted, deserves to grow up in a world where men like you do not exist. You are not just ruined, Marcus. You are erased." The finality of it broke him. Marcus's legs gave out, and he sank to his knees on the polished marble floor. A ragged, animal sob tore from his throat. The carefully constructed facade of the arrogant tyrant crumbled into dust, revealing the pathetic, whimpering creature beneath. He was not sorry. He was caught. "Get him out of my sight," Adrian said quietly to his security team. They moved without wasted motion, lifting the sobbing, broken man to his feet and dragging him away. The crowd parted for them, their faces a mixture of shock, pity, and morbid fascination. The entire confrontation had lasted less than 3 minutes. The ballroom was utterly silent. Every eye was on Adrian and Alara. Adrian turned back to her, his expression softening as his gaze met hers. He gently took her hand, turning it over to look at the red marks left by Marcus's fingers. He brushed his thumb over them, a gesture of profound tenderness. "Are you all right?" he asked. She looked at the empty space where Marcus had been, then back at Adrian. She took a slow breath, the first one that didn't feel tight and painful. A slow exhale. She was. For the first time in a very long time, she was all right. She gave him a small, watery, but genuine smile. Yes. He nodded, satisfied. He then turned to the stunned, silent audience, his voice ringing out with calm authority. "My apologies for the interruption." He raised Ilara's hand, holding it firmly in his. "Allow me to properly introduce my partner." His eyes found hers, and in them she saw not just protection, but profound respect. "This is Ilara Vance. She is not just the mother of my daughter. She is also the brilliant architect who, years ago, created the initial conceptual designs for the Thorn Tower, an oversight and crediting that I intend to rectify immediately. In fact, she has just agreed to head the new architectural and design division of my company." A murmur went through the crowd, a wave of reassessment and dawning understanding. He wasn't just defending her, he was crowning her. He was taking the truth of her competence, a truth Marcus had tried to bury, and displaying it for the entire world to see. He was giving her back her name. The silence broke. The banking magnate Adrian had been speaking with earlier stepped forward, a wide smile on his face. "Well, in that case," he said, his voice booming, "a toast to new partnerships." The tension shattered, replaced by applause. It started with a few, then spread through the entire ballroom, a wave of validation and acceptance. Ilara stood there, holding Adrian's hand, bathed in the warm light and the sound of their approval. The weight she had been carrying for years, the heavy cloak of fear and insignificance, simply dissolved. She was not a victim being rescued. She was a queen, finally taking her place on the throne that had been waiting for her all along. The ride home was quiet. The city lights streamed past the windows of the armored car, a river of diamonds. Ilara leaned her head against the cool glass, Thea's name a silent, happy refrain in her mind. She was safe. They were safe. It was a feeling so new, so profound, it felt like learning a new color. Adrian didn't speak, but his presence beside her was a comfort, a solid, grounding force. He had not just vanquished a monster for her, he had given her back the parts of herself she thought were lost forever, her talent, her name, her strength. He had not saved her. He had simply cleared the path so she could save herself. When they arrived back at the penthouse, Helena was waiting, a knowing smile on her face. She had been watching the live feed from the gala. She simply hugged Ilara, a fierce, warm embrace that said everything that needed to be said. "Welcome home, dear," she whispered. Later, after checking on a peacefully sleeping Thea, Ilara found Adrian standing on the balcony, looking out over the sprawling city. The wind was gentle at this height, the air clean and sharp. She came to stand beside him, wrapping her arms around herself. "Thank you," she said softly, "for everything." "I did what was necessary," he replied, not looking at her. His gaze was fixed on the horizon. "You did more than that," she insisted. "You gave me a voice. You gave me back my work." She paused. "You introduced me as your partner." He finally turned to her, the city lights reflecting in his dark eyes. "That's what you are," he said, his voice matter of fact. "In business, in raising our daughter, in this." He gestured between them at the fragile, powerful new reality they were building. "I am a better man with you. My portfolio is more balanced." She laughed, a real, genuine laugh that reached her eyes. "Is that a compliment, Mr. Thorne?" A rare, small smile touched his lips. "It's the highest one I'm capable of giving." He reached out and took her hand, his fingers lacing through hers. His hand was warm, familiar. "This is not a fairy tale, Ilara. It will be complicated, but I don't leave when things get complicated." "Neither do I," she said, squeezing his hand. They stood there for a long time, in the quiet of the night, high above the world that had once seemed so cruel and unforgiving. The silence between them was no longer empty or awkward. It was full of unspoken understanding, of shared history, and of the steady, quiet promise of a future. It was not a happily ever after born of fantasy and ease. It was something far more real, far more valuable. It was peace, an earned peace. A family built not on a flawless past, but on the complicated, messy, beautiful truth of the present, and the shared daily choice to stay and build what comes next, together. The city glittered below, no longer a threat, but a kingdom waiting for its new queen. And for the first time, Alara felt the slow, steady certainty that she was finally, truly home.